Imagine such a bold project that promises to transform the way we understand clean energy in Canada, tackling economic, environmental, and social challenges like no other. An infrastructure giant that has generated controversy and debate throughout its construction. But what is behind this immense work that few know about? Today we will take you on a journey where you will discover untold secrets and unique perspectives on one of the most shocking hydroelectric projects in the world. You don't want to miss this. Site C is a hydroelectric dam, a mega project in a country recognized for its prominent role in the hydroelectric sector. This is no ordinary project, but the most expensive ever built in all of Canada. In addition, it has been the subject of much debate. The site will provide renewable energy for 450,000 homes. However, since its construction began in 2015, the budget has almost doubled to about $12 billion. The project has received much criticism from political figures, journalists, indigenous groups, and environmental activists. On the other hand, clean energy could be crucial to Canada's sustainable goals and economic growth. Despite the controversy, the developer is determined to complete the project. Why? Well, in today's video we'll find out as we delve into the most expensive dam Canada has ever built. Site C is a hydroelectric plant. You can imagine it as a kind of battery. The water stored behind the dam contains potential energy. When water is released, this potential energy is converted into kinetic energy. The water flows through the turbines that start to spin, and the generators produce electricity. From this it seems simple, but it really isn't. In any case, Canada produces 60% of its electricity from hydropower, making it the third largest producer of hydropower in the world. In fact, Site C is one of 475 hydroelectric plants in Canada. Why so many? Well, hydroelectric power makes sense. There is a lot of water in Canada. The technology is reliable and efficient, and the energy produced is renewable, relatively clean, and cheap. All this to say that Site C is nothing out of the ordinary in terms of infrastructure. However, it is still quite impressive. When the dam is finished, it should look something like this: 1,000 meters long, 500 meters wide, and 60 meters high. The dam contains 60,000 cubic meters of earth-filled material. Most came from the excavation site, but some had to be transported on a 5-kilometer-long conveyor belt system. It may seem like a lot even for a dam, but it's built to withstand an earthquake that occurs once every 10,000 years, and many say British Columbia is one behind. The reservoir behind the dam will be filled for 4 months, once the repainting infrastructure had been completed. 83 kilometers of the Peace River will be flooded in the process, creating a reservoir more than half the size of Washington, D.C. Once operational, the site will produce 5,100 gigawatt-hours of electricity per year, increasing British Columbia's total supply by approximately 8%. Not only that, the electricity will be renewable, available on demand, and relatively affordable, according to builders. So what's the problem if Site C can provide so much renewable energy? Why has it been criticized? To understand it, let's go back in time and try to see the big picture. This is the Peace River in 1872, long before anybody thought about using it for hydroelectric power, and this is the Peace River. Today you will see Site C is not the only dam on the river. In fact, there are 3. And they're all part of a major hydroelectric power project that was first proposed in the 1950s. The first dam, the Tolkien to Siboney, was built in 1967 and created the Williston Reservoir. At the time, the dam was the largest structure ever built, and to this day, Williston remains the 7th largest reservoir in the world by volume several years later. In 1980, a second dam was built downstream in La Paz Canyon, and the Dinosaur Reservoir was created. As you can see, it's much smaller than the Williston Reservoir, but that's one of the main advantages of this project. By building several dams on a river, The same water can be reused to produce electricity as it moves downstream, and that brings us to Site C despite years of pressure from BC to Hydro. A public company, in charge of the three dams, faced repeated rejections by the provincial government. CBC Hydro anticipated a 2% annual increase in electricity demand, but the government disagreed. Ultimately, in 2014, the project received approval. What changed? British Columbia's population had tripled since the initial Site C proposal. The economy had flourished, and Canada had begun its transition to net zero. With this in mind, the government finally agreed that there was enough demand for more electricity. Thus, in July 2015, one budget of approximately $6,400,000. Construction began, however. Not everyone agreed before approving the Site C. The government ordered a review of the project. The person in charge of the process, Harris Swain, spoke out publicly against the proposal. He disagreed with BC Hydro's rationale for Site C, believing that there was no need for another dam. He stated that if demand for electricity increased, BC could produce more through alternative sources, and he was not alone. The leader of the opposition, John Horgan, also openly opposed the dam. He promised a thorough review of the project if elected. In 2017, we advanced a little, and Jordan was chosen by then. Construction had been underway for 2 years and was already behind schedule and over budget. However, Jordan kept his promise and ordered the review. The conclusion was that if Site C continued to exceed budget, it would not be economically viable and would be more expensive to scrap. In the official document, the reviewers tried to be neutral and pointed out that everything depended on future energy needs, which were difficult to predict. But in other notes available on the Public Service Commission's website, members of the review board were more forthright. Given this situation, and considering his previous opinion on the dam, Jordan decided to continue with construction. Although it was not his favorite project, canceling a mega project of this magnitude during its construction is a difficult decision. Still, they face more challenges. BC Hydro's 2020 progress report classified the project's status as red, cited serious concerns about schedule, scope, and budget, and discussed problems with some of the foundations. And speaking of foundations, there's a history before construction. Site C does not sit on solid rock, but on shale or soft rock that can move under changing pressure. This is not unusual, as 16 other dams in the world have been built on similar terrain. However, it is crucial to have a stable foundation, especially in areas prone to landslides. To solve this problem, BC Hydro proposed a unique concept. Instead of a straight-line dam, they chose an L shape. In addition, they incorporated a concrete buttress to increase stability and protect against seismic activity. They placed roller-compacted concrete on the short stretch of LY, built key components such as the spillway and generating station on top. This provided a more stable base and improved the overall stability of the dam. Today, the construction is almost finished. And according to BC Hydro, they plan to start filling the Site C reservoir on August 25th. The most recent estimates put the cost at about $12 billion, making it the most expensive dam in Canadian history. Part of this cost increase is due to geotechnical delays and COVID slowdowns, but the real cost is not measured in dollars and cents alone. The controversy surrounding the dam goes beyond money or safety. Site C is located on Treaty 8 lands, an 1899 agreement that covers an area larger than France and protects the rights of 39 First Nations indigenous communities to hunt, fish, and trap on their ancestral lands. Flooding the Peace River to create Site C will destroy nearly 10,000 hectares of this land, violating Treaty 8 First Nations constitutional rights. Even John Horgan, prior to his change of position on the draft, spoke on behalf of Treaty 8. And he wasn't the only one. In 2019, the UN called for construction to be suspended until an agreement is reached with the affected First Nations. Although construction did not stop, an agreement was finally reached. And of course, a mega project like this does not only affect people. The Peace River Valley is also home to a wide range of wildlife that will be displaced or killed by the reservoir. One report indicates that at least 63 species are threatened by the construction. In fact, the WWF openly condemned Site C, claiming that it will cause irreparable damage to local wildlife. Beavers, birds, bears, and elk will lose access to their natural habitat and migration routes. BC Hydro's plan will replace the wetlands the project will destroy, but rebuilding the ecosystems takes a long time, and critics argue the damage will already be done. Considering all this, it is fair to say that Site C, like many megaprojects, faces numerous economic, environmental, and social challenges. So why are BC Hydro and the government so determined to continue with it? Well, there are three reasons. The first is the most obvious: electricity. Site C will produce clean, renewable electricity for more than 100 years. When operational, production will be enough to power 1,700,000 electric vehicles every year. In addition, hydropower is one of the cleanest forms of electricity available. BC Hydro assures that Site C, it will emit fewer greenhouse gases per gigawatt hour than most alternatives, including wind and solar. However, it is not only the amount of electricity that matters, but also its availability. Inside the dam, there is something called a main gate that opens and closes to control the amount of water that flows through the dam. With the use of the main gate, the dam can produce more electricity when demand is high and reduce production when demand is low. This is a crucial difference between hydropower and other renewable energies such as wind and solar. We can't control the amount of wind or sun, but we can control the amount of water that flows through a dam. This makes hydroelectric projects such as Site C highly efficient. In addition, since Site C is the third in a series of dams on the same river, it is even more efficient by reusing upstream water. Site C will produce 35% of the electricity generated at the WAC Bene Dam, but with only 5% of the reservoir surface. As a result, Site C provides a large amount of clean electricity using a relatively small amount of land. Yes, thousands of hectares will be lost to flooding, but it will be much less than if the dam was built on a river with no existing infrastructure. Ultimately, electricity has to come from somewhere, right? The second reason for continuing with the project is the economy. Despite its high cost, Site C provides a wide range of economic benefits to the region and British Columbia generally, according to BC Hydro. The construction of Site C will add $130,000 to the regional GDP and $3,200,000 to the GDP of British Columbia as a whole. In other words, Site C will generate many jobs, both directly through construction and indirectly through the purchase of goods and services. In February of this year, more than 2,700 people were working on the site if we add up all the working hours allocated to construction. They are equivalent to 10,000 years of employment. And if we include all manufacturers and service providers whose work is carried out on site elsewhere, that number increases to 33,000 years. All this work activity helped to grow the economy as a whole and has positive effects on development throughout the province. It should also be mentioned that BC Hydro has invested in many projects to help repair some of the damage caused to communities and wildlife by the site. Projects such as the $13 million Indigenous Traditional Use Fund to preserve land and resources for traditional use, or employ a full-time officer to care for local wildlife. In addition to all this, there is the fact that the government has already spent billions of dollars on the project. If the government gives in to pressure and stops construction, most of that money will be lost, which is not reflected well in the budget sheet. Finally, this brings us to the third reason. This one is a bit more speculative and definitely up for debate. But in essence, Site C is not the only mega project BC has been working on. Let's talk about the coastal pipeline. It is a 670-kilometer pipeline that will transport natural gas from northeastern British Columbia to the west coast. And where does the pipe start? Here in Dawson Creek, 40 miles from Site C. Why? Well, the gas extracted from the ground has to be processed at Dawson Creek before being sent through the pipeline. At the other end, in Kitimat it's pronounced Kidai-made. The gas is cooled until it becomes liquid, resulting in liquefied natural gas or GNL. These processes require a huge amount of electricity. The LNG produced is sold abroad for large profits. Therefore, some believe that Site C is being built to produce the electricity needed to prepare LNG for export. The British Columbia government could earn $23 billion in revenue from this export project, plus another $24 billion in private sector investment, with huge gas reserves across Canada. The potential gains are huge and the market is there. Asian countries are lining up to buy Canadian gas, which the government continues to promote as environmentally friendly because it will help Asia move away from coal. BC Hydro has addressed this controversy by stating that Site C will be necessary with or without an LNG sector. They point out that British Columbia's electricity grid is integrated, meaning that all electricity is pooled regardless of destination. But critics say using hydroelectric power for processed natural gas is simply an attempt to green up an unclimate-friendly industry, prioritizing profits over the public good. What is your opinion on this? Is it better to provide the energy needed for liquefied natural gas through hydroelectric power? Do you agree with the greenwashing argument? Either way, Site C is scheduled to start producing electricity sometime next year, and since they start filling the reservoir at the end of August, this deadline seems very realistic. If all goes according to plan, we will finally be able to see what the Peace River Valley will look like in the coming years. We can re-evaluate whether Site C was worth it or not. Perhaps the increased use of clean energy can offset the project's significant budget issues, or maybe the legacy of environmental damage, the liquefied natural gas industry, and indigenous land rights will burden the dam throughout its lifespan. One thing is certain, people will continue discussing this. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep exploring more about the world's most fascinating and controversial projects, remember to subscribe to our channel. Like the video if you found the information intriguing and helpful, and share it with your friends so they can also discover these surprising details. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and tell us what you think. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you in the next video.